Okay, well, it looks like we've got about half of our registrants on, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started. First of all, I want to welcome everyone to our event today. I'm Carla Howell. I'm your UL System Research and Grant Writing Content Expert. And I'm also the director of the Office of Sponsored Programs at Northwestern State University. I'm very excited about today's session. I expect this to be one of our most informative and valuable sessions yet. I think I say that every time, don't I? But it turns out each time it's getting better and better. We've all played a role in submitting proposals, and now more than ever, the need for the funding that is made available to us by our Board of Regents Enhancement Program is crucial. The struggle to enhance our labs and improve our curriculums is vital, as most of us are facing a decline in enrollment. And we need to up our game to make our institutions more attractive for enrollment and retention. My hope is that everyone leaves here today with ideas and little perks to help make our UL system institutional proposals stand out and lead the consultant's priority one funding list this year and next year and the years in the future. I'm going to do a general introduction, and with that being said, let me introduce you to our panelists today. We're happy to welcome back Bryan Jones, our Board of Regents Enhancement Program Manager. And I recently learned that Bryan's going to be adding another hat or two, so we're going to be seeing him in some other areas. Bryan's been at the Regents for 17 years, and we're happy to have him back with us today for this panel session. Bryan, do you have any expectations for today that you'd like to share with us?
Oh, I just enjoyed helping out. So whatever y'all want to hear about, I'm happy to talk about.
Okay, thank you. Our next special guest is Dr. Gerald Sonnenfeld. Dr. Sonnenfeld serves as a reviewer for the Board of Regents Enhancement Program. He's chaired the last 3 health panels and has worked with all of the programs, for my understanding, for a few years. I think he said over 20, possibly. I've been told that he loves our program, and he's currently a microbiologist, immunologist, and research administration consultant in his retired capacity, from what I'm understanding. He's a former vice president for research and economic development for the University of Rhode Island and a former vice president for research at Clemson University School of Health Research. Dr. Sonnenfeld, welcome to our panel. Jerry, and any thoughts you'd like to share before we move on at this point?
Well, thank you, and I appreciate the privilege of joining you today, and I look forward to it because you're right, this is important now, and it's important for the university to have the opportunity to get as much as they can, and it's going to be very competitive, and the better proposals that are prepared, the better you will do in achieving your goals. So anything that can be done to help is a good idea, and I'm glad to do it.
Thank you. We're very honored to have you with us. Next, we have Dr. Aimee Hollander. She's our Board of Regents Enhancement Program Award recipient. Dr. Hollander is an assistant professor in the Department of Teacher Education, as well as the director for Nicholls State University Center for Teaching Excellence. She is the Nicholls State University 2022 Top 10 Award winner based on grant productivity for last calendar year 2021. Her research interests include effective methods for teaching life science, identifying misconceptions in scientific concepts, and using service learning opportunities for faculty professional development. Dr. Hollander, let me first say congratulations, and we are so excited to have you joining us today. Is there anything you'd like to add before we jump right into our questions?
Yeah, thank you so much for that introduction. For folks that are thinking about going for a BOR grant, last year was the first time I went for one. So it is possible to have a first try grant be funded, but also for folks that are putting in for a second or third time, I've had to do that too with other grants. So perseverance does pay off.
Exactly. We appreciate that. I'm going to ask all of our attendees, if you have a question that you come up with, we've got a few preliminary questions that came in that we'll start out with. And if you have a question, please put it in the Q&A and we will go through those as they come up. And again, thank you all for joining us. I hope that you leave here with some very valuable information today. I'm going to start off with one that's come in, and I've had this come up at Northwestern several times with Bryan. Is there an updated taxonomy list anywhere, or do we just still follow the old list? Or if we have a question about eligibility, do we just reach out to you?
Well, always reach out to me if there's any question, because that's what I'm here for, and I don't mind helping out. But there's not an updated list. A few years back, we revamped the entire enhancement program. We were asked to by one of the last few commissioners. They've all been coming through here over the last 17 years, but one of them decided we were going to redo the whole program. I rewrote the RFP, and the new deputy commissioner told me that we needed to ditch the taxonomy. NSF apparently ditched it, and we were using theirs. But if you have the old one, if you look for a NSF one, an old NSF one, that'll give you guidance. But we just don't use one. And the language that's always told to me is the onus is on you to prove that you belong in this category.
Great.
And it's tough for some folks, but you can use an old one as a guidance, but otherwise talk to me and we'll help give you what guidance we can.
Okay, our disciplines are transitioning so much with the focus on workforce development. There are some questions that come up occasionally. Yeah,
and when we in the RFP we changed the language from department to academic unit, just because the way campuses are organized and the way disciplines are taught and organized is all in flux the last few years, for sure.
Exactly. Okay. Jerry, can you give us a few examples of what really helps a proposal stand out amongst the competition? When you start reading one, what are the things that you look for?
Sure. Well, the first thing I'd say is if someone shows that they've actually read the request for proposals, that makes the project stand out, because a lot of times, and particularly the Board of Regents programs, but all programs will ask for certain things. They'll ask the applicant to do certain things or answer certain questions. And it's really amazing how many people just ignore those questions and don't answer them. That's not a smart thing to do, because if you don't do that, you run the risk of what the NIH used to call being nerfed and being disqualified because you don't respond to the proposal. So you need to do that. Another thing that stands out is that if someone, when they're talking about how big a sample they're going to use, what they do, that they actually do a power analysis and not say, well, we're going to use 9 subjects because somebody else used it or because it looks like it's going to work, but to do a very simple statistical analysis that you can do on a computer automatically in about 3 minutes that will tell you how likely you are to have statistically analyzable data. That's a very positive thing. And the other thing that stands out is that let's say you're proposing to do A, B, C, D, E. Well, what do you do if A doesn't work? Okay, if you come out and have an alternative and show that you're thinking, well, if A doesn't work, that doesn't mean that the whole project stops and goes on. We can try a different route from to substitute for where we were originally going to go. That makes it really stand out. And people who write proposals where you get useful data, whether it works or it doesn't work, that's a very positive thing that you can see for that. It's important. It's as important to know that something doesn't work as it is to know that something does work. So those are things that really help stand out.
And I know here at Northwestern, my thing is read the RFP and read it again, and then read it one more time just to pick up what you missed. And in our office of sponsor programs being a centralized office in the way that we function, that is the thing that we tell them, send us your draft. And we let them know that they have touched every topic area, follow the headings so you know that you're answering exactly what needs to be. Look at the rating sheet and see, make sure you're answering those questions.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
And one thing Jerry just said that stands out, because I've said that so many times in so many workshops for so many summers and falls, read the RFP. And then I go back and I'm about to edit it. And I know the first 3 or 4 pages are just state mandated gunk. So do read it 3 times, but read it really carefully. Know what is the state mandated language and what is exactly what Jerry said, which is what it's looking for. And every grant program is asking for something different. And when you come in and say, I've got this great idea, I'm going to force it into this square hole, even though my idea is round. And if you know exactly what the program is looking for, then maybe you can adjust what you're asking for to fit exactly what the RFP is looking for.
Great, thank you. Okay. Aimee, how much time did writing your proposal take?
Well, before I even started writing my proposal, after reading the RFP a few times, and I also was very careful about picking collaborators who would be helpful and give me very honest feedback, I immediately contacted Bryan, because before even deciding to write a proposal, I'm an assistant professor, so I have a teaching load, I have a research load, I run a center on campus, and then in my personal life, I have 2 children under the age of 5. So I'm very busy, and I'm not going to write a proposal with an idea that's likely not to be funded. And so before I write any grant to any agency, I always call the program manager. I always make an appointment and call them and run that idea by them to make sure that this is actually something that would be funded by this organization, or maybe like Bryan said, I need to think about how to change my idea a little bit, or maybe this is just not the appropriate funding agency and I need to keep this idea going but find a different organization to fund it. For me, this was the first, all my grants that I have been on, either as a PI or co-PI, I have collaborated with others. And I find that to be really helpful, both in the workload. I work at a predominantly undergraduate institution like everyone else here. I don't have TAs, I don't have a PhD program in my department, so I don't have folks to help me write these. And so I use Google Docs a lot for writing the grants for collaboration. And especially for that BOR grant, like we literally took the exact BOR grant headers and we formatted everything into a Google Doc to work on it together. I don't know how long the BOR grant took. That was an idea that had been cooking for years in my brain space, and I was very passionate about it and had been revising it for a while. So that one didn't take as long as I thought it would, but I also utilized my collaborators. We split up different tasks and, found the information we needed for it. Whereas other grants, like I have an NSF BWET grant that took a little bit longer to write. But I use my summers a lot, or if I have the fall, my course load is a little bit lighter than in the spring. So I just try to work it out that way. I try very hard not to bring schoolwork home at night on the weekends if I can. But I do think, like, I can tell you right now that although I'm a recipient of this award belongs to my collaborators as well, because they obviously helped me with the writing of the grant. And even now, I think about what Jerry said. We look at this grant as now what type of publications can we get out of it, and how can we work together with the data that we're collecting from these grants to lighten that workload as well, because all my collaborators are from predominantly undergraduate institutions and they have full teaching loads and research loads as well.
And we have to utilize those resources. I've been working with getting trying to get our faculty to reach out to each other and to reach out to our sister institutions. And that's an important connections there.
Can I add something to that? On every single one of my grants, I have folks that are not my departments. And I have, and on one of my grants, it is a multi-institutional grant. And that has been awesome because you get so much feedback. And even like Bryan noted, like I might read that RFP and interpret something one way, and then my collaborators will be like, Hollander, I think we should think about it this way instead. And even the way that we write, I've become a better grant writer because of the feedback we're receiving from one another. And it's also helpful to learn what resources different institutions and different departments have to contribute to the research. So it's, please walk out of your buildings and talk to folks in other departments and other institutions, because it's very helpful for getting that grant funding.
My guess is that Aimee talked to me for the first time in probably July before she applied in October, and she just had a big idea she wanted to run by me. And then she came back a few weeks later with a small team, and they had different ideas to run by me. And then she came back a third time with a full team just to make sure that everything they were formatting into the grant was what we were looking for. So she was incredibly thorough, and she, like she said, she talked to me, which is, you know, one of your top 2 rules: read the RFP and talk to the program manager. And she clearly was building collaborators throughout that entire process. So she's exactly right. That's one of the most common things I hear from people like Jerry. And, you know, I just did the debriefing where I've edited, you know, 200 documents. And one of the most common things was, this is a great idea. It needs co-PIs, or it needs someone in this area. There's no proof that these people know how to take care of this whole, is there someone else working with them that's used this machine before, or has run a program like this? Why don't they have someone higher up in the administration so they know, we know that they have the support from a dean or something?
And Bryan, I know reaching out to you early is key, and like Aimee did, and there is a deadline that you can talk to applicants, right? Do y'all still have that?
Yeah, it's in October. And if you haven't, if you come to me on October 1st and say, I've got this idea, then I'm going to answer your questions. But my guess is you're probably not going to be that successful. And if you come like Aimee in July, then I'm curious, and and I'll mark you down in my brain as like, I'm going to be rooting for somebody like Aimee. Like, I don't, Jerry will let you know that I have no input at all, and I just try to run it completely objectively. But I know the people that have been talking to me, and when they bring up someone that talked to me 3 times that summer, I'm excited. I'm like, oh, good. Let's see if she listened to me, and then she did, and she gets funded, right?
And keep your when you're looking for collaborators, keep a broad view as to who you're going to have to collaborate. I once had one proposal that had was involved with, well, maybe 20 principal investigators in about as many different countries. So I got to learn about how all the regulatory things work in different countries, and it's fascinating to do that. And we actually got it to work and published papers, but and found the information that we needed. But don't necessarily think that it's got to be the person in the next room or even in the next state, but keep a broad open mind. Now, for the Board of Regents one, you have limitations on where the funding can go and where it can't, but that doesn't mean you can't collaborate with people who may have their own sources of funding. And certainly if you're going to do it internationally, most US agencies, except for certain specific programs, will not fund people from out of the country. NIH will, but most others won't. So, you have to be careful and manipulate and do things the way to make it work. But when you start doing things like that, not only is it exciting for you, but it also becomes exciting for the reviewers to see that you've got people from all over the place interested in this particular area of work.
Thank you. Yes, I can see that. We've had a question come in from Lauren at Nichols, and I'm going to go ahead and throw it out there. Bryan, you may want to start with this one, but I think you all may have a little input. How do you decide on an idea to submit?
Can I go?
Sure.
Sure.
I a lot of my grants are interdisciplinary. I am a science educator, but I work with folks in the biology, the chemistry, physical science departments, and other departments on campus. And so what I do is I kind of find my cohort of trusted folks. Obviously, if you have a great idea, you don't want anyone to scoop it, depending on your area of research. I know when I was in the biological sciences, that was a really big deal in my field. Not so much now in science education so much, but I talk to my colleagues first and get some feedback. And then once I've kind of vetted that and also Googling and seeing like have similar ideas been funded in the past by other organizations, what's already out there. Um, and then Bryan, if it's a BOR grant, and then I'll contact Bryan.
The way I think there's two things here. One is you don't want to be asking for money for the sake of asking for money. You know, it's good for your tenure track. It's good for your reputation. It's good for your department. But the key is the first thing is someone like Aimee has to look around and say, what do I want to do that needs to be done? What's a problem that I can fix? And that's the approach that wins. You know, when I've gone to some grant writing seminars and I basically tell people now, you're selling your idea. You're saying, I've got an idea to fix my department or improve my department or push us into the modern era, and you're going to help me do it. This is what I've noticed, and this is the way that it's going to happen, and I need the money, and you're going to give it to me. But the other thing is, you might have an idea that would be great for you in your research and your grad student or your partner, research partner, but it's not a very impactful idea for Nicholls State. And so I added a new thing when I revamped that program 4 or 5 years ago, a mission statement. And it's not just the corporate mission statement that's just blah language. I want them to say, these are my priorities for the Department of Education for the next 5 to 10 years. And then as a PI, you come in and say, I've got an idea that addresses one of those priorities in a targeted way, which is targeted enhancement. Or I've got a big idea that's going to address our priorities in a comprehensive way, which is up to 5 year $1 million grant, and it addresses multiple priorities. So that's the framework where your ideas comes from. It's not just for the sake of getting a grant so you can tell people when you apply for a new job, hey, look how much money I've earned. There's a real problem or a real issue or a real hump that your department needs to get over to be in the modern era of education, and your application is the solution to that problem.
And I would add that one thing you've got to look at when you're thinking and when you've looked at what you've done in the past is you have to be prepared to fail. This is the way this works. This is the way our system works. And actually, it's turned out to be a pretty good system because, you know, Germany years ago used to have Herr Professor Doctor who got all the money and then he doled it out to other people in the department as he saw fit. And I'm saying he because at that time it was all he's. But Germany and the rest of Europe have started to apply what we do for awarding money because it's the most effective way to do it. But you have to be prepared. You have to not take it personally, and you have to keep at it because the people who will not succeed are the ones who become so disenchanted because they've been turned down that they don't go on. So look at the comments you get back from reviewers and use those to build the grant. Whether you agree with all of them at all, these are what people think when they read this. So use those, and you may find from the reviewer comments that they're right, and this grant could be a lot better if I went off in a new direction with it. So do that. Also, if you've been turned down 3 times in a row, it's time to start thinking, well, maybe I should look at something else to do, that this is just not going to impress people who do it. Because the chances of you're having exactly the same reviewers every time in every place you go and apply is very small. But you never know what's going to happen. I had one grant that was absolutely slammed and torn apart by one of the NIH agencies, who said that there was no point in doing it. And I had sent the same proposal to the Environmental Protection Agency. And this was the first time I ever got a grant that the agency actually added money to the grant, because they said I hadn't asked for enough. So now this was a long time ago. I don't think you'd see that anymore. But, you know, keep an open mind, and also keep an open mind as to where you're going to go, because something may not be the right proposal for agency 1, but it may be the right proposal for agency 2, or something may not be the right proposal for building for redoing a unit and enhancing the unit, but it may be a perfectly good research proposal that someone's going to be interested in. So keep an open mind. In my career, I never in my life thought I was going to be funded by NASA for 30 years and that I would ever have anything to do with them. But the opportunity came along and I took it, and it worked out extremely well for me. So keep an open mind, be willing to change and to modify what you're doing. And I'm not telling you to ever do anything you really don't want to do. Don't do that. But can you get it done if you do it a slightly different way?
And one key thing to remember is perception is reality. And if Jerry perceives that your evaluation plan is vague or doesn't make sense, then but you know it makes sense and he just doesn't get it. But the fact is that he's in charge of that panel. And so look at it from a different perspective and say, maybe I can change this in a way that it's still fundamentally the same, but it makes sense to people. If it's not making sense to a panel, then the odds are it probably isn't gonna make sense to the next panel at a different program. So just know that the perception of how you're presenting things is ultimately the reality. Yeah.
And can I just add one more thing? And I'm not sure if this would be BOR specific, but what I've also found, especially in organizations such as teacher ed or nursing, is we talk to our stakeholders a lot. So for me, if I'm having my stakeholders come to me with an issue or a problem, we need better teacher training in something, we need these materials, and I have that support of the stakeholders, and that's in the grant, I have found that has strengthened my grant proposals for other organizations. So receiving that feedback and having that as proof that not only do I think we need this, but also the people that it will directly benefit in this career path or school district has helped me out tremendously as well. And like Jerry said, I always back my grants up with quantitative data of where we are at and why this is a problem. And that really helps because you don't know who's going to review your grants, and qualitative, or I find personally like quantitative data can be very helpful.
The only thing I'll say is, in almost 50 years of writing grants, if I had a nickel for every grant I ever wrote that was turned on, I would have the money for the biggest grant ever given for research in the world. So do not think if you are turned down that there's something really wrong you're doing. You just have to modify it and go on, and do not give up.
That's it. Thank you all. Find the fit and make the corrections there and make it, then you can make it work. Well, thank you. Thank you, Lauren, for that question. Bryan, we've had another question come in is, does the Board of Regents encourage collaborative proposals with multiple schools involved? Something that can benefit more than one school, such as a shared facility for enhancement proposals?
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's not super common, but it's common enough. I mean, I was going over one contract coming in that was for multiple schools in New Orleans. I know Nichols got one of the very first comprehensive enhancement grants when we started that, and they were teaming up with Tulane. Whereas Nichols had the idea, it was coastal research, and Nichols has a bigger connection down on that part of the coast, but Tulane had the equipment and the backing and the expertise, and it turned out to be a good partnership.
Okay. Yeah, I always see that as a benefit. I try to encourage that, like I said, the reaching out. And I think Aimee touched on that earlier, with the collaborators. Let's see. Aimee, do you have your peers review your proposals before submission?
I do. It depends on where we're at in the semester, right? I mean, like the BOR grant being due in the middle of fall semester, it depends, but I'll have folks who are not even in my discipline review it. I had the director of our library here at Nichols. She was interested in the grant because they were involved in the grant. They didn't help write the grant. And so she was like, do you want some feedback? And I welcomed it. So yes, I do. And then what I'm finding now after this experience is who else writes grants well, and can we peer review amongst each other, even within our department? So for example, Dr. Peterson, who's across the hall from me, she wrote a grant that was scored the highest out of all the BOR grants. And so of course, now knowing that and knowing what a spectacular writer she is, I want to collaborate with her so much more and work with her to, improve my own writing, because we're always improving ourselves, and getting her feedback as well. So please take advantage of your trusted colleagues. I also have run ideas by colleagues who would not be competitive for the same pot of money, so I could go out of state. So for example, with this BOR grant, I talked to some friends and colleagues at other university systems outside of Louisiana just to kind of get some feedback from them and have them look over some parts or pieces of it as well.
I appreciate that. And you touched on something that, and I'm going to ask Bryan this, because we often suggest to have someone review it outside of your area, outside of your discipline, because you need to make sure, the enhancement panel reviewers, do you still have someone from every eligible discipline, Bryan, that reviews those? And that way, if they are someone outside of the area, make sure that they're able to understand it. Because if you just have your coworker in the same department, they know all your jargon, they know your language, they know your processes, but you need, the reviewer needs to be able to understand it if they're totally, not in your area. Do y'all still handle it that way, Bryan?
Oh, absolutely. And in something like education, that's not going to be the case, because education is education.
Right.
And so I get two education people. But in something like health and medical sciences, I do my best, but I have to, number one, I have to get them ahead of time, because if I want to get someone as experienced as Jerry and his team, I have to ask them close to the summer, because their academic calendars are going to fill up fast. And number two, there's only so many things you can cover. Health and medical science goes from nursing to surgical stuff to microbiology. And even with a team of 4 people, there's stuff that's just not in their area. And they're experienced grant writers, they're experienced grant reviewers. And so they can tell if it's a well-written grant or not, but they're not always going to be an expert in that field.
Right.
Yeah, that's something that's very important, because if you apply to the NIH or NSF, those agencies are big enough and have enough proposals that you're going to have review panels that are really specific to the exact area you're in. You're going to have an immunology panel, you're going to have a toxicology panel. The Board of Regents can't do that. And for that matter, neither can most of the other federal initials. So you're going to have people reviewing it who may not be 100% familiar with everything in your area. And it's very important, if you use abbreviations or you use anagrams where you list initials that something is called or an enzyme is called, make sure you define it the first time you read it, the first time you mention it, rather, because nothing's going to upset a reviewer more than having to spend a half an hour looking up to find out what a phrase means. So you're gonna give a negative message if you do that. So make sure to define everything you're going to use, because even people in the same area don't necessarily know the exact jargon you're using, because it may be something that only people who are in one small part of your area use and won't know it. So it's important to make sure that the reviewers understand what you're talking about.
Absolutely, absolutely. For targeted enhancement, if a department discipline is not on the list, but research work may align with other listed discipline, can we apply? That's a question that comes up a lot, Bryan, I guess on the multidisciplinary, I never get that word, options. So you want to explain that with a little more detail?
Say that one more time.
For targeted enhancement, if a department or discipline is not on the list, but the research work may align with other listed disciplines, can we apply?
Okay, if your discipline's not on the list, as in the eligible disciplines.
Right.
Yeah, that's real tricky. The idea is wherever that's housed in your campus, whatever work you're working on, that's where you want to apply. I'm trying to make sure I'm hearing the question right. But
I think they're asking like if the rooted discipline, if they're going to be doing work that aligns in that discipline and it's eligible, even though they're in a different area.
Gotcha. Yeah. What I was trying to say is where the enhancement hits, like what department is going to be enhanced. And so if you're doing something that's slightly outside of your discipline, or in your, it's if biological sciences at Northwestern is being enhanced by your project, then you apply to biological sciences. And if mathematics is being enhanced at even though you're working in computer science, you're working with a bunch of math people, and ultimately the end result is the enhancement of mathematics study at Northwestern State. That's where you apply. But there's a long history that I've been trying to weed out by language in the RFP of people saying, we're doing computer work, therefore this is computer science, because we want to apply during this year because that's when computer science is eligible. And it's really tricky in engineering because those folks, would rather apply every year. And they're like, well, we're doing stuff that's really mechanical engineering, so we're going to apply in a year, even though we're in civil engineering. But we're doing stuff that's really mechanical or something, and the reviewers just generally just dismiss it. They're like, well, this is, you're just using language here. You're not really enhancing civil engineering. So you just have to be real careful. And the key is always to come through me. I've talked a lot of people out of wasting their time over the years. So if you run that through me, I'll help guide you in the right direction. But that is tricky with multidisciplinary. And when it does come to multidisciplinary and you really are enhancing multiple departments, you just need to gauge how much impact is happening in each thing. You have an idea that's mostly biological sciences, but you want to apply in chemistry because it's eligible. So therefore you bring a chemistry person on that does a little bit of work, and therefore you say it's a chemistry, but it's multidisciplinary, and you apply in chemistry. That's usually going to get dismissed because a bunch of chemists are reading proposals saying, I don't really see the chemistry here. I see a bunch of biological sciences people trying to get money. So you just have to be very careful how you approach it.
Exactly. Yeah. We've got a question, and Bryan, it may be that we could just provide her a link, but someone says, curious, how many grant proposals did the Board of Regents receive during the last academic season, 2020, 2021, 21, 2022, and how many were funded? And all of that information is available under the consultant's report.
Yeah. You can get the exact numbers. It's been very, very interesting the last 2 years because we've been, as an entire international society going through a pandemic.
Exactly.
And it has hit the support fund really hard. And I can't tell you exactly why. We got about 100 proposals as opposed to 180. We had about an average of 175 proposals after we revamped the program and made it one big pot. That was 5-6 years ago, we got like 170, 175, 190, 180, and then we got 100. And then last year, I thought things are normalizing. All right, everyone is kind of got their feet underneath them. It's not a summer of not knowing whether you have a job or if you're going to be teaching or if this, money is worth looking for. And we got 100 again. And the good news is that means that your chances went up, because we really haven't changed the amount that we funded. When we were getting 175 enhancement proposals, we funded 25 to 30. And then we got 100 and we funded 25 to 30. So twice as many people, in terms of percentages, got funded. Going forward, who knows? Who knows? We were looking for answers. That's all you can do when you have numbers in front of you, is put together hypotheses, and it kind of changed. When we had the same results the next year, you're like, well, things have changed, but the numbers haven't. And so one of our ideas was that there's just so much money post-pandemic being put into higher ed. Just all this extra research money being put out there, that maybe that dissuaded people from applying. But the answer is that we, since 2008, our funds got cut in half. They've been slowly climbing back up. We've been hit with lawsuits, people arguing over oil money, Texas, Mississippi, Louisiana, the federal government. We've had to pay $10 million straight up out of our funding to solve these lawsuits and stuff. So it's been pretty stagnant. You can expect for the next few years to have 3 comprehensive and about 25 targeted funded, whether there's 100 or 200 proposals.
I put a link in the chat that takes you to the consultants reports, where you can look at each year. If anyone would like to go and look at that, you can put it by year. And I think your cover memo generally has a summary of it, but there's a summary report at the bottom of each of those consultant reports for each year that gives the detailed information of how many were submitted, how many were funded, and
Sure.
lists those.
But it's always going to be a calculated gamble.
Right.
For some reason, humanities folks just went nuts for 2 or 3 years, which is great because I'm a humanities person, right? And there was, during the pandemic year, they got 27. It was only 100, and 27% of that 100 was humanities, which was wild. And then last year we got 4. So
Yes, it does
who
change.
knows why? But it's pretty wild.
Okay, let's see. We've got for large grants, is it a red flag if the panel sees a junior faculty assistant professor as the PI?
What do you think, Jerry?
I think it depends. Okay, what you've got to do is, if you're going to make a large grant application and want a lot of money, I think what the reviewers are going to be looking for is experience. So you may be a new assistant professor, but you may have 20 years of experience in the area. If you don't have the experience, then having a collaborator that has the experience will definitely help you. But I think if you want to get a large grant, you better get some small grants first and show that you have the ability to carry out the work and do it. Because to start with a large grant, I would say, is probably not a good idea. Starting with a smaller one as the first one you get will be very helpful. I know the first grant I got was from NASA, and it was for $10,000. Now, this may have been 1975, when $10,000 was a lot of money, and I could fund 3 graduate students plus my laboratory and buy some equipment with it. So it doesn't mean the same thing it meant now, but it was still it wasn't a $100,000 grant, which was a big grant at that time. So my advice is to start with a smaller grant, and that when you go for the big grant, if you can't show the experience yourself, collaborate with someone who has got the experience, who who can give confidence to the reviewers that you can carry out the work.
I'd like to add to
I would
that.
say oh, pardon me. Go ahead, Aimee.
I was just going to say, so I'm a biologist. I have a PhD in microbiology and immunology, but I am now in science education. And so, like Jerry was saying, I don't have a vast experience in publishing in science education. And so when I do go for grant funding, some program officers and program managers have indicated to me that I do need someone who has a publication record in this area for them to consider this, or to show that there are folks on this grant that have the experience necessary. So that's why for a lot of my grants, I have to collaborate, but I enjoy the collaboration as well. It's very helpful for me in my situation. But I do think it's a double-edged sword, because you're a new PI and you're trying to get out there and get money so you can do your research. And yet you still need someone who has the experience to get that money too on your team.
I would say definitely just be very careful, because I've read a few thousand reviews now, and I've seen that pop up a lot. But again, I've read a few thousand. But I've just seen that where this is a junior faculty member. They don't have a lot of experience with this. They could really use a co-PI, or they should really get someone higher up in their department to apply for this. So just be very careful and look at your situation. And I always tell people, think like a reviewer. Anticipate questions and think exactly what do they see when they see my grant. And if they see a junior faculty member with no support, well then, and you can look at that and say, well, maybe that's not what they want to see. But when I was so excited a few years ago when someone from Delgado Community College got a comprehensive grant, because I would have to go to summer workshops and they'd say, how can, these are all going to go to Tulane and LSU. The first one that was UL system was UNO, and the perception is a little different than a LSUA or Delgado. And both of those colleges got grants. And one of them was the lady from Delgado who had never written a grant before. And yes, she's the exception that proves the rule that Jerry just said. But the fact is, it can happen. So don't doubt that you should be doing it if you're junior faculty. Just proceed real carefully.
And preliminary data is really the hallmark. If you can show preliminary data, that will really help the reviewers have confidence in your ability to do the work. So use the small grant to get preliminary data, and then go for the big grant because you can show you can do it.
Right, okay. Let's see, where are we at? Bryan, can you provide specific examples for the targeted workforce proposal?
Yeah, I sure can. And that's something you need to be careful with too. Targeted workforce was set aside when we got rid of 2-year enhancement. We used to give $1.25 million a year to 2-year colleges specifically, and they competed amidst themselves. And the folks at 2-year colleges came in and said they wanted some sort of program that's there now for scholarships. And the leadership told them, you can't have both of these. And they decided they wanted us to focus on that. But I still wanted to carve out something that was open for 2-year schools within this larger project, because it's just difficult for them to compete. And there's a section that they suddenly couldn't compete in. Like it's Southern Shreveport had a airplane engineering program, like for repairing airplanes. And where does that fit in enhancement? It doesn't. So now they have their own category. But legally, ethically, I'm not going to create something within the enhancement program that cuts out 4-year schools. So the language I put in there is it's for any program that falls outside of the traditional academic structure. And especially these days, there are programs that are being created that do not fall directly within health and medical sciences or biological sciences or chemistry. So a specific example of your what it's intended for would be the airplane repair or the welding program at BRCC that got funded. But we've also funded a food packaging project from the LSU Ag. And they came up with a way to train people over the course of 4 years on how to prepare and package agricultural products. But that's not really an ag thing. And I'm telling you, at least 50% of the time, I look at targeted workforce proposals, and they either get rerouted to a different discipline because they're like, this is a nursing program, but we're using workforce numbers because there's a workforce issue. And this is totally aimed at getting this specific type of nurse to do this specific procedure that's going to help a huge workforce need in Louisiana. And that just means they misread the RFP, but I'm going to give them a fair shot and let Jerry's team read it. The other half of the time, it's just something that's not eligible. They're like, computer sciences isn't eligible, but we're training this workforce full of high-tech, computer people. And I just don't get it reviewed. I'll let the workforce people write on there, this is ineligible, because I'm not going to make that choice, but I'll let them say it. So look at that RFP information very carefully. Make sure you understand exactly what we're looking for. It is a proposal that falls outside of all the eligible disciplines in either year. And if you think that's you, I'd still talk to me first to make sure. But that's what it's there for. It's for a program that is modern and doesn't quite fit the traditional structure for disciplines.
Okay, I think that should help. It definitely enlightened me. I was kind of have questions. Help me answer some questions of my faculty that have come.
I need a new word for workforce, and the workforce has just not helped me because when I revamped the RFP, I created 3 categories just to help the review panels and to help the applicants, because the review panels need as much specific data, and Jerry and Aimee have both brought this up multiple times, as much specific data as they can use. And I try to give them a framework. And I also want you to know that the old days, everyone was trying to balance research and education. The panelists were trying to do that. They were like, this is all research. We're not sure if this fits. And I want you to know that if you have a 100% research proposal, that's okay, because Louisiana needs research. And if you have a 100% education proposal, especially if you're from some of the smaller UL schools, then that's completely okay, because McNeese still needs to educate people, even if their task is not heavy research. And a third category I put is workforce, because there are some projects, like a nursing project, that is, there's not enough people doing this sort of scan. And it's new, and Louisiana is desperate for them. And we have a program specifically for this. And the information that I'm going to give Jerry is all workforce related. So I give you a matrix of workforce related data that you can provide the health and med panel. And the word I use for that category is workforce, and it just throws people off to no end. But I haven't come up with a better word for it. Maybe this summer I will.
Okay. Aimee, did you find Logan difficult to navigate? I mean, I'm just going to say first, with all the electronic systems that I work with, I find Logan to be one of the easiest from the centralized office standpoint. But how did you handle?
It wasn't difficult, but I also worked very closely with our Office of Research and Sponsored Programs for the uploading. They were incredibly helpful in that. Also, I know it sounds ridiculous, but like getting things in a PDF and some of the clerical things that I might not have been as attentive about, our Office of Research and Sponsored Programs was really helpful with. And I was telling Carla this earlier, like, I'm horrible with budgets. I don't know why, but it's like I have a brain block. So I also utilize them heavily when I'm coming up with my budget, just to make sure I'm doing everything I'm supposed to be doing based on our university policy. So I think when if you have a great idea right now and you're thinking, man, I really need to get this funded, really that should be your first stop, is your university's Office of Research and Sponsored Programs, or whatever that equivalent might be. and then Bryan. But I didn't have any issues with Logan. I had to request an extension on my grant because of Hurricane Ida. I didn't have enough time to spend out the money or do what I needed to do for that grant, and that process wasn't difficult. And again, I went through my Office of Research and Sponsored Programs, and BOR has been wonderful with that process, understanding our situation down here in Terrebonne Parish and Lafourche Parish. So I know I have a report that's going to be coming up next year, but I think that won't be too much of an issue with Logan either.
Well, thank you. Thank you for saying that. And I encourage all of you to reach out to your Office of Sponsored Programs, Research and Sponsored Programs, whatever it may be at your university. We have a cohort of us from each of our system schools, and we meet together and we discuss issues and we hammer out problems, and we are here to help you with that and be a liaison with you in the Board of Regents. And also it gives us a heads up that you are looking at doing a proposal. So any of you, out there, faculty or staff, please, reach out to our offices to help you with that. Thank you, Aimee. We've got a follow-up question over here. I'm not sure if this is, this may be one that Bryan may want to answer directly. It says, if the enhancement is in computer science, but the application is in manipulating search results in all areas of research, and the outreach training is conducted across nursing, it's not showing the rest of my question. Would that, I guess what he's asking is, would that be eligible in computer science?
Yeah, again, the idea is just what is being enhanced.
Right.
And if computer sciences at your institution is being enhanced by your project, that's what we're going for. And again, there's multidisciplinary things. If it's just there's another question you had prepared beforehand, and where is, if it's just this campus-wide thing where computer science people are helping create this project that the whole campus is going to use, that's not computer sciences. It's not any discipline, and it doesn't apply. It's not going to fit enhancement at all. But if there's something that just happens to be incorporating, and this happens a lot, and in successful and unsuccessful things, it's very, very common, is that computer sciences is heading up this thing. It really is going to be headed in computer science, but it's helping out engineering, it's helping out nursing. There can be 4 or 5 different departments that are on a multidisciplinary grant, as long as the end result is that computer sciences is getting legitimate, tangible enhancement.
Great, thank you. I'm going to hit on this one because I know it's one that a lot of people run into. Is, can enhancement funds be used to hire faculty, and can you give an example of a justification that is acceptable?
The short answer is no, because of the word faculty. Like, our money is not here to hire faculty, and within the rules, there's been lots of people that have tried to do that, but it's just not a long-term good investment of our money. And in some instances, it's just not legal because we're a state program that's based out of the Constitution of Louisiana, and there's just certain rules we have to follow. A bigger answer would be, if you take the word faculty out, especially in 5-year grants, you can use this money to hire people short-term. You can use consultants that come in, full-time consultants that come in for a year to revamp your curriculum, and you want, the university is going to pay $20,000 and you want us to pay $40,000. That's something that we do. But the justification is the key. That's another key in that question, is justification. Because there's plenty of projects where the panel will look at it and be like, this is a 5-year $1 million grant, and spending $30,000 on someone to run this lab for 2 years while it gets off the ground, that's worth it, because ultimately it's going to have a benefit that is many more times the $30,000 you spend on one person. It's very common in labs. Somebody needs to come in, set it up, run it until the department and the institution can come up with a solution. And the justification comes in the commitment to sustainability. That's a huge, huge word. There's words that if we do a workshop with any of your campuses this summer, there's a few key words that I want you to write down in capital letters, and one of them is sustainability. And if you just want us to hire somebody for the sake of hiring somebody, just to give UNO a break, so they don't have to spend the money to hire this person for a couple of years, that's not good justification. That's just going to be dismissed immediately, because there's better ways to use 60, 70,000 bucks than just to give the institution a financial break on hiring someone that's going to be there for the next, hopefully 5 to 10 years. But bringing somebody in a pilot project that the institution has committed to funding, if it's a 1-year pilot project or a comprehensive 5-year project, and once this new degree program is in place, once this new lab is in place, once this multi-instrument facility is in place, then ULL will pay for a full-time person. But to get this off the ground, you want us to give you 80,000 bucks to bring somebody in for a year. That and then ULL will come up with a solution once you've proven that this thing is going to last. So there's your justification. But in terms of just hiring an actual faculty, in quotation marks, an actual faculty person, right, that's mostly illegal and almost always frowned upon.
Okay, we're coming up on an hour. We still have, some things that are coming in. Are y'all, Aimee, Jerry, Bryan, are y'all available for a few more minutes, or do we need to try to wrap it up?
I'm fine.
I'm fine too.
You can do about 5 more.
Okay. Let's see, Jerry, we want to know, what are some of the more common mistakes that cause low scores on proposals that when you see this, you're like, this is not going to be fundable?
Okay. One thing is basically not telling the whole truth and trying to manipulate something into what it isn't. The reviewers will pick that up very clearly, so that will take care of it too. The other is not justifying why you're doing what you're doing. Sometimes you'll have people that will do five things in a project, and one of them really has nothing to do with it whatsoever, and there's no justification for it. Justification is the most important thing. Having preliminary data is extremely important. If you don't have any preliminary data and you don't have any publications, that's it. You're not going to. Also, if you claim to have expertise in a particular area and you're a senior person and you haven't been funded in the last 10 years, the chances of being looked on favorably is not good, because what have you been doing for the past 10 years? Why haven't you done anything? So the main thing is being, I think if anything you do is not credible, not believable, that's going to bring down the proposal. Also, if you get things totally wrong, that will bring it down as well. If you say that X is important and it's pretty clear that X is not important, that's not going to gain you a lot of support. So there's one where there was a particular question. It was actually a pretty good proposal and looked pretty good, but there was a question that was asked and the question was just ignored. Wasn't responded to. It wasn't even mentioned. Well, if you do that, that's not going to go, because no matter how good it is, it shows you're not paying attention to what's going on. So you have to show credibility, and that's the most important thing you can do.
Thank you. I'm going to put this topic out there because I know it's one that questions always come up about. Match. Bryan, I know it's not required anymore in the enhancement program. I'd like to hear a little bit from you on that. And Jerry, how much does it weigh on a reviewer when they see cash in kind, and then maybe Aimee, obstacles that you run into when trying to do it? And I know we're way on time, we're losing people, but I know that this is a topic that everyone has questions on generally. So Bryan, you want to tell us what's required, what's
Yeah, for sure. It's not required. It used to be, you know, not required, but really, really, really helpful. Pre-2008, I think ULL had a 20% policy for all the grants that they used to have this massive office, and everything that ran through there had to have 20% match. And it really helped them. It helped them get on the same competitive floor with LSU real quick. Post 2008, nobody had any money, and grants and matches became way less common. I'm doing contracts right now, and I'm looking at $180,000 piece of equipment that had no match, and I'm like, this used to never would have fly, but now we do that all the time. But as much as it's not as common anymore, it's not going to hurt you as much, but it will always help you, because what it shows you is support. It shows you that if this is not just Aimee's great idea, this is something her department really wants. And in any kind of form, if there's no match at all, that means how interested is the department really?
I agree. Match shows that there is some interest in the institution and what you're doing. That if you get letters of support, that's very helpful too. But a match will basically convince the reviewers that the institution, not only you think the proposal is important, but the institution supports it. And again, for me, I don't care whether it's an in-kind match or a cash match. Some places cannot do a cash match. I understand that. For the Board of Regents proposals, if you say that the fact that you're not taking F&A costs, indirect costs, and use that as a match, that to me doesn't fly, because there's no requirement for that. So you're not really doing anything. But on proposals to other institutions, if the institution can do that and can waive part of the the indirect costs. Speaking as a vice president for research at 3 institutions, I will tell you that's a hard thing to do, because that's how we operate the infrastructure. But if there's some kind of thing, it's very, very possible. On the other hand, we understand in some places it's very difficult to do it. So it won't hurt you a lot if there's no match, but it will probably benefit you if there is a match.
And the other word is leverage. And if SLU's nursing department is putting up $45,000 for this lab for mannequins, Jerry's brain is going to go, wow, that means that the Board of Regents, this money that I'm in charge of, has to spend $45,000 less. And that's leveraging the investment. And that's if it's a good proposal, that's going to put that a little higher than the other proposals.
Aimee?
Yeah, to add to that, we, at least for my proposals, I've always had to do in-kind match. It's just the situation that we are in right now. And I think a lot of institutions that are of similar size and situation with enrollment. But with that, you just get creative with time.
Yeah.
And you get creative with resources. And so for me, it was working very closely with our Office of Research and Sponsored Programs and how we're going to do this to make sure that my grant could be competitive. And then, of course, make sure that the university agrees with what type of match we're going to try to put up as well. So again, I think especially, at least for us at Nicholls State, and I know for a fact a lot of our sister institutions, you can get creative with in-kind match as well. It may have to do with using time and course load and other things and other types of facilities as well.
That's an important thing, because a lot of people don't realize that if you're spending, let's say, 10% of your time on the project, and that time is being paid for by that institution, you can put down that 10% time as a match.
It has value.
You should,
Yes.
you should do it, and that's also true when you go outside to other funding agencies as well. And it also helps you to make sure you don't get in trouble with the federal regulations, because you cannot be paid for more than 100% of your time. So this way it helps it track it and make it very clear. But that's a good way to provide a match, because your salary has got to be paid no matter what. So use it that way.
Right. And that's how I do it, at least at my institution, because we are heavily a service program. Like, I don't just teach in the classroom. I have to go out in the schools and do a lot of other things in our community as well.
Yeah, this is great. I don't think I can say enough the comments that I'm just getting about how wonderful today has been and how much information, it's extremely informative. I expect our UL system schools to just fill up the consultants reports for this fall's competition next year. I mean, we need to get in there and get the lion's share. Before I give the last few comments here, do any of my panel members have any thoughts that you'd like to add for today's discussion?
Can I just say one? This is just an anecdote, but I think why I was invited here was I had what I call a unicorn year. I applied for 3 or 4 grants in 1 year. I'd been cooking them up for a while during COVID, talking to folks, saying, in the after times, what are some things we want to accomplish? We were seeing a lot of issues in my field that we wanted to address. And somehow all the grants I applied for got funded, which is wonderful, but also overwhelming, because now I have to do everything I said I was going to do on those grants as well. But this year, I continue to apply for a couple of smaller pots of money with some folks, because once you start getting funded, everybody wants to play in your sandbox, and that's just the reality of it. And that's wonderful. So I started collaborating with a lot of other folks from around the state, and not one single grant's been funded. And that's just how it is. You will have a really great year or two where you will get a ton of funding. This happened to me as well as a scientist. And now, I'm getting all those reviewer feedbacks. And in a couple of years, when things slow down, we will reapply to various funding agencies with that feedback. So I just want folks to know, don't get discouraged. I hope you all have unicorn years where you get multiple avenues of funding. But you could be at it for a couple of years and not see a cent as well. And hold on to all those drafts and make friends with various professional organizations, because you just don't know where funding's going to start coming out of, especially post-COVID. Looking for funding has been a little bit more interesting now.
Thank you, Aimee.
I would say that it's important to remember that no matter what area you work in, it's important, and you should look to support it and be funded. I'll give you an example. When I was at Rhode Island, the university got a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities, and it was about $40,000 or $50,000, which we would look at as a smaller grant, but $40,000 or $50,000 is a lot of money from the National Endowment for the Humanities. And it was a grant that I thought the people who wrote it were brilliant, because they filled a real need. What they had the grant for was to create a program to to help PhDs write. Okay. And at first I thought it was for foreign PhDs, but it wasn't. It was for US PhDs, where English wasn't the first language, but it was for US PhDs, because you would be amazed how many highly educated people cannot write a paragraph. And, by doing this with this relatively small amount of money, it made the newspapers, and it had real impact on the university. So whatever you do and however much money you get, it's important. And don't forget that, and don't give up the ship. No matter what happens, keep working and be fluid, and be able to modify what you're doing, because keeping going on something that gets turned down over and over again is not likely to yield to success. So be prepared to modify it and move on.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jerry. Our feedback for our webinar is very important. So I know a lot of you are having to sign off. So please go in and there's a link in the chat to complete. I think it's 8 short questions, Katie said, and give us your feedback on that. Bryan, I didn't mean to cut you off. Any final thoughts?
Oh, this was an excellent format. I've done so many of these that I could do them in my sleep, but this has been really interesting because I go on and people might tune me out. I'm just a bureaucrat here, but it's nice to hear everything I usually say confirmed by an applicant and by a reviewer.
Thank you,
And
Bryan.
I think that's really useful to the people listening because they're applicants and they're going to be reviewed, and I can tell you what I've heard, but now you're hearing it straight from the horse's mouth, right? That's exactly how they look at things.
Great, thank you. I just
Remember one thing: without bureaucrats, nothing happens.
Oh, that's right. I know that, but I know that I hear myself say the same things over and over, and to hear y'all say it kind of confirms that. It makes me feel better. And it's exactly right. The persistence is the key, because for every reviewer I have like Jerry that we brought back for 20 years because he runs an incredibly detailed, tight ship, there's people I bring in that have resumes that look beautiful, but they're not very good reviewers. And they're good enough. I stand behind all my reviewers, but if you're not giving me the kind of feedback I want, and if you don't run the kind of panel I like, I fire people every year, and I got a pretty high firing rate. So the person that reads your proposal for this program 2 years from now might be totally different. And I've seen it over and over again where it's not, I'm a history person, so I can't tell you why your computer sciences project stunk, but I've seen the same project become #1. And it's just because this panel comes in with a totally different perspective, and they're looking at the writing in a different way. And so you do want to take everything they say seriously. You do want to respond to it in some way, but don't let it tear you down right away. At least try again once or twice.
thank you, Bryan. Thank you. I can't say thank you enough to our guest panelists for today. I think this has been great. Bryan, Jerry, Aimee, it's been such a pleasure meeting you all, and we appreciate you sharing your expert advice with us. I think this has definitely been one of our best sessions. Bryan, you're right. This panel format has just worked out wonderful. This is my first time to moderate a panel session, so I wasn't sure, what to expect and how it would go, but this has been great. Thank you to all the participants, and I can't say thank you enough to Ann, Katie, Caitlin at our system office. You girls rock, and words can express how thankful I am to have you navigate these sessions for me. Everyone, please go share your thoughts and comments, suggestions with the feedback link that's posted in the chat. Let's all go get to writing grants, and I hope you have a blessed day, and thank you all for joining us.
All right,
I
Bryan.
did fail to mention, we put a little blurb on there. We need those of you that are still here, watch for details on a summer workshop series. We're going to have 3 weeks in July that I'm going to have 2 sessions per week. We'll be doing some panel sessions like this. Ask the grant writer, ask the reviewers. And we're going to bring in some program officers again. So y'all be watching for the details on that. We're finalizing that now. Okay. Thank you all, and y'all have a great day.
All right,
Thank you,
you too,
y'all.
Carla.
Goodbye.
Thank you.